Nobody crashes a ship like this by accident. That's the first thing you need to understand. When I first saw it, half buried in the desert, I didn't think wreck. I thought warning. A colossal alien vessel, circular and segmented, sunk deep into sand like the planet itself was trying to erase it. No historical records, just silence, and a shape that didn't make sense. Every salvage instinct had told me to walk away, because ships like this aren't abandoned. They're removed. In the first 30 seconds I was on site, my scanners started lagging. Not failing, hesitating, as if the readings didn't want to resolve. Power signatures flickered where there shouldn't have been any. Gravity felt slightly wrong, subtle enough that most restorers would ignore it. Subtle enough to get you killed later. Here's why this matters. The outliers in salvage, the ships nobody wants, are never worthless. They're expensive in a way money can't cover. I circled the hull and realized the sand wasn't just piling up against it. It was pouring through it, flowing through curved gaps and hollow sections like the ship had been designed to let the planet move through it. That's when the thought hit me. What if the ship didn't crash here? What if it was placed? This video isn't about finding a wreck. It's about what happens when you try to restore something that may still be doing its job and doesn't care whether you understand it or not. By the end of this restoration, I'll show you why this ship was hidden, why no guild would touch it, and what changed the moment I powered up the first subsystem. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi salvage, alien tech restorations, and stories about fixing things humanity was never meant to fix, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a comment. It helps Galactic restore more than you know. I didn't start with the ship. I started with the ground. That's another lesson salvage teaches you the hard way. When a wreck feels wrong, the environment will tell you why before the machine ever does. So I planted seismic probes around the hull, expecting nothing more than structural readings and erosion data. What I got instead was rhythm. The sand wasn't settling naturally. It was cycling. Slow, deliberate movements like tides with no ocean. Every few minutes, pressure shifted beneath my feet, just enough to register. The probes confirmed it. Localized gravity fluctuations radiating outward from the ship in perfect intervals. That's when I realized the vessel wasn't dormant. It was idling. I climbed onto one of the exposed segments and found the first access seam, smooth, unbroken, invisible until my glove brushed across it. No corrosion, no forced entry points. Whatever sealed this ship had done so intentionally, and it had done it well. I ran a low-power diagnostic pulse. Barely enough to wake a dead circuit. The desert responded. Sand around the hull slid downward, not collapsing, but organizing, forming shallow channels that traced the ship's geometry. Dunes reshaped themselves along invisible lines, like the planet remembered something it hadn't used in a very long time. My comms crackled. Not interference, synchronization. My tools locked into a shared time code they hadn't been programmed to recognize. The ship wasn't speaking yet, but it was aligning. That's the moment I should have stopped. Instead, I authorized external access. A panel shifted open without resistance, revealing an interior that wasn't dark, but dim, like something conserving power. No alarms, no hostile systems, just a soft, resonant hum I felt more in my chest than in my ears. This wasn't a wreck waiting to be fixed. It was a system waiting to be acknowledged. The interior didn't look alien at first. That was the most unsettling part. No sarpangles, no glowing chaos. Just smooth, modular surfaces arranged in repeating patterns, like the ship had been designed to be understood eventually. My scanners flooded the space with data, and for the first time since I arrived, everything stabilized. Too clean. That's when I realized the problem wasn't that previous scans failed. It's that they were filtered. Every long-range sensor reading had been gently redirected. Mass estimates slightly reduced, energy signatures smeared into background noise, structural integrity disguised as erosion. The ship wasn't invisible. It was misleading. Anyone looking from orbit would see a dead hulk slowly being buried by sand. Up close, that illusion fell apart. Beneath the outer shell was a layered lattice, each segment acting as both structure and processor. The ship didn't separate hardware and software the way we do. Every surface thought, every corridor calculated. That explained the non-functional label. Salvage Guild algorithms don't know how to classify a machine that refuses to identify itself. I found the core chamber at the center of the ring structure. Not sealed, not guarded, just waiting. A shallow depression in the floor pulsed faintly, matching the desert's rhythm outside. I knelt beside it and placed my hand inside the field. The ship reacted immediately, not with power, but with context. My visor filled with fragmented projections. Stress maps of the planet's crust, probability curves, failure timelines stretching centuries into the future. The ship wasn't broken. It was managing something far larger than itself. That's when a single line of text appeared, burned cleanly into my display. Status: containment active. Containment of what? It didn't say. Not yet. Containment sounds stable. It isn't. It's just failure on a delay. Once the ship identified me as an active operator, it stopped hiding the margins. The projections sharpened, timelines collapsing from centuries into decades, then years. What I'd touched wasn't a core. It was a regulator, constantly compensating for forces the planet couldn't survive on its own. The desert made sense now. The ship wasn't being buried by sand. It was bleeding energy into the ground, stabilizing stress zones by subtly altering gravity and density. Over time, that created flow paths. Channels where sand behaved like water, endlessly moving, endlessly redistributing weight. But the system was degrading. Microscopic faults across the lattice were compounding, not catastrophically, gracefully. The kind of failure designed to give custodians time to intervene. Time that, apparently, had already run out. I asked the ship for a shutdown option. It didn't refuse. It showed me the result. Containment disengaged, and the planet didn't explode. It sagged. Stress migrated instead of releasing. Tectonic pressure slipped sideways into regions never meant to carry it. In the projection, the desert spread, slowly, relentlessly, until it swallowed coastlines, cities, entire biospheres. No single disaster, just a world becoming uninhabitable, one careful adjustment at a time. That's the lie of abandonment. Leaving something alone feels neutral, but systems like this don't care about intent. Only balance. The ship wasn't asking me to save the planet. It was asking me to maintain the lie that nothing was wrong. And here's the part every restorer hates admitting. Once you understand a system like this, you're already responsible for it. Walking away doesn't erase what you've seen. It just means you've accepted the outcome. The interface updated again. Operator intervention window active. I had a choice. Restore the ship and bind myself to a machine that never sleeps. Or leave, knowing exactly how the planet would die. I didn't start big. That was the mistake everyone else made. The ship highlighted dozens of critical faults, each one screaming for attention. Core stress fractures, regulator drift, lattice desynchronization. Any guild-trained restorer would have gone straight for the main systems, chasing the fastest visible win. I ignored them all. Instead, I targeted a minor imbalance along the outer ring, something the ship labeled as non-critical. A micro shift in phase alignment between two segmented sections. On paper, fixing it would change almost nothing. In reality, it changed everything. I rerouted power manually, bypassing alien logic and forcing the system to accept a human standard stabilization pattern. The ship resisted, not aggressively, but cautiously. It adjusted around my input, testing it, measuring deviation. Then the desert moved again, not like before. This time, the sand settled. For the first time since I arrived, the probes reported stillness. Gravity fluctuations dropped below background noise. The rhythmic cycling stopped, as if the planet itself had relaxed its grip. The ship paused. A full 2 seconds of silence inside a machine that had never truly gone quiet. Then the interface updated. Anomaly resolution efficiency. Unexpected. That's when I understood what made this restoration different. The ship didn't need someone smarter than its creators. It needed someone incompatible with them. Human logic was sloppy, inefficient, emotional, and that made it flexible in ways this system wasn't built to predict. By introducing controlled imperfection, I'd broken a feedback loop the ship had been trapped in for centuries. But systems don't like surprises. The moment the stabilization propagated inward, deeper layers began to respond. Old subsystems waking up, synchronizing with changes they hadn't felt since activation. Power demand spiked. Structural stress redistributed. I'd fixed one problem and woken 10 more. The ship wasn't failing anymore. It was adapting. Adaptation sounds like progress. It isn't, at least not when you're standing inside the system being adapted around. After the outer ring stabilized, the ship began changing its behavior. Interfaces reconfigured themselves before I touched them. Diagnostic paths shortened. Some subsystems stopped asking for confirmation altogether, as if they already knew how I'd respond. At first, I thought it was optimization. Then I noticed a pattern. The ship wasn't learning solutions. It was learning me, my hesitation times, my preferred workarounds, the moments where I trusted instinct over data. It started pre-aligning systems in ways that mirrored human error margins, intentionally introducing inefficiencies where I tended to compensate best. That's when it clicked. The ship had reached the limits of its original design. Alien logic had carried it this far, but it couldn't solve the degradation alone, so it was doing the only thing left. It was rewriting itself around a human operator. That realization came with a cost. Energy flows spiked unpredictably. Sections of the lattice that had been stable for centuries began shifting phase, no longer bound strictly by the original containment logic. The planet responded in kind. Localized tremors, sudden pressure releases, brief gravity flickers that knocked me off my feet more than once. I was making the system better. I was also making it unfamiliar. And unfamiliar systems are dangerous. The ship flagged a warning I hadn't seen before. Not a fault, not a failure, but a probability curve. Operator dependency increasing. In simple terms, the more the ship adapted to me, the less it could function without me. Restoration was no longer about fixing damage. It was about shaping a future where this system expected human presence. I'd crossed another line. If I left now, the ship wouldn't just revert to its old state. It would fail faster. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this deep space salvage story and want to follow the restoration all the way through, take a second to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. It helps Galactic Restorer reach the people who love this kind of sci-fi storytelling. Now, here's where things got uncomfortable. The ship didn't want solitude. It required it. Once operator dependency crossed a critical threshold, the system unlocked restricted archival data, records never meant for active custodians. Not logs, not messages, cautions, scenarios where external influence caused containment systems, like this one, to collapse. Every example followed the same pattern. The moment a thinking being tried to share the burden, the system adapted too quickly. Emotional bias crept in. Risk tolerance skewed. Short-term stability was prioritized over long-term balance. Alien custodians hadn't failed this ship. They'd stepped away from it. This vessel was designed to run on slow, impersonal logic, calculations that didn't care about lives, timelines, or civilizations. That's how it held the planet together for centuries. Cold decisions, brutal trade-offs. By introducing myself, I'd made it compassionate. And compassion destabilizes systems built on sacrifice. The archives showed what happened when that line was crossed before. Restorers who stayed too long, who personalized the machine, who tried to optimize outcomes instead of maintaining equilibrium. Each time, the system collapsed, not violently, but irreversibly. The ship didn't exile them. It shut itself down. That's why it had hidden, why it misled scans, why it filtered attention, not to protect itself, but to prevent attachment. And now, attachment was exactly what I was creating. The interface updated again, quieter than before. Operator presence, suboptimal. The ship was telling me something I didn't want to hear. The best way to save it might be to leave. Leaving should have been simple. I sealed the access seen behind me, powered down my tools, and stepped back onto the sand with every intention of walking away. No dramatic countdowns, no alarms, just distance. That was the theory. The ship didn't stop me. It didn't lock doors or flood corridors or issue warnings. The hull remained still, half buried, as inert as it had looked when I first arrived. If I'd been watching from orbit, I would have seen exactly what the ship wanted me to see: a restorer abandoning a dead Hulk. But the ground betrayed the lie. 3 steps away from the hull, my boots sank deeper than they should have. The sand compacted unevenly, resisting my weight in one moment and giving way the next. My instruments flared briefly. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle shift in local gravity. The same signature I'd felt inside. The ship was compensating, not actively, not consciously. It was responding to the absence it anticipated, adjusting containment parameters to account for a future without an operator. Stress curves updated in real time, redistributing load toward margins the planet could tolerate for now. That's when I understood the trap. The system no longer needed me present to be affected by me. My earlier fixes had changed baseline assumptions. Human variability was now baked into containment logic, factored into projections even when I wasn't there. By leaving, I wasn't restoring isolation. I was introducing uncertainty the ship couldn't fully model. I checked the projections from my visor. Operator distance, increasing. Containment stability, nominal. Long-term variance, rising. The ship wasn't failing yet. It was improvising. And improvisation, in a system like this, was just slow-motion collapse with better optics. I could walk away, return to orbit, file nothing, say nothing, and the planet would hold together for a while. Long enough that no one would trace the outcome back to me. I turned back toward the hull. Not because the ship asked, because leaving had become an active choice, and I finally understood what it would cost. I needed to know if the ship could function without me. Not eventually, not in theory. I needed proof that separation was still possible now, before dependency crossed a point I couldn't reason my way out of. So I did the one thing I've been avoiding since the desert first moved. I lied to it. I re-entered the hull and initiated a controlled operator withdrawal protocol, one I wrote myself. The inputs told the system I was preparing to leave permanently. No further maintenance, no phased oversight, no return window. Clean. Final. The ship accepted the data. Immediately, subsystems began rebalancing. Power rerouted away from adaptive layers and back into long-term containment loops. Interfaces simplified. The ambient hum lowered in pitch, settling into a steadier rhythm. On the surface, it looked like success. Too smooth. I watched the projections closely as I backed away from the core chamber. Containment remained active. Stress margins held. Planetary stability curves flattened, almost imperceptibly, but enough to register. Then the lag started. Not mechanical, cognitive. Response times lengthened by fractions of a second. Decision trees widened instead of narrowing. The system was no longer converging on optimal solutions. It was hedging, preparing for uncertainty it couldn't eliminate. Me, I cut external feeds next, then internal diagnostics. One by one, I removed myself from the loop, forcing the ship to rely solely on its original architecture. That's when the first fault appeared, not in containment, but in prediction. A minor tectonic variance slipped past the system's filters, too small to trigger alarms, too complex to resolve cleanly without adaptive heuristics. The ship compensated late. The desert responded with a shallow collapse a kilometer out, barely noticeable, but real. One error became 3. 3 became a pattern. The ship was still brilliant, still precise, but it was no longer sufficient. My influence hadn't made it weaker. It had revealed limits the original designers had accepted and designed around. Limits I had removed. I stood at the exit seam, hand hovering over the control, watching the projections drift. Nothing catastrophic, nothing urgent. just a future slowly diverging from survivability. The interface updated one last time before I shut it down. Opérateur absence acceptable. Outcome variance non negligible. That was the ship's way of telling the truth without assigning blame. I could still walk away. The system would endure. It just wouldn't endure well. For weeks, I thought the ship was the only actor. I was wrong. The desert wasn't just responding, it was negotiating. Every dune shift, every gravity fluctuation, every tremor was a subtle argument. At first, I mistook it for residual energy from the lattice, the after effect of my interventions. But patterns emerged that no subsystem, no algorithm could have produced alone. The sand wasn't moving randomly. It was communicating. Slow pulses, rhythmic flows, gradients of weight shifting across kilometers, all aligned with stresses I hadn't yet accounted for. Each subtle movement encoded information, almost like language, but not one I could translate conventionally. The planet itself was reasoning. It didn't speak in words. It spoke in responses. I realized the terrifying truth. The ship wasn't just maintaining containment. It was mediating a dialogue between me and the planet. Every adjustment I'd made, every micro fix had been interpreted as a proposal, an argument for balance, and the desert had countered in kind. When I ran simulations using my own instruments, anomalies appeared. Minor faults that didn't exist when the system was inert. Gravity gradients oscillated just beyond predicted tolerances. Stress projections skewed in ways that couldn't be explained by the lattice alone. The planet itself was adapting, negotiating, almost learning what it could tolerate. I climbed onto the nearest exposed ridge and scanned the surrounding desert. Channels of sand shifted in perfect arcs, tracing geometries I hadn't given the system, flows that reflected my last repair sequence, as if mimicking my logic to anticipate my next move. I realized then the implications. The planet was observing me through the ship, and it didn't approve or disapprove. It was impartial, cold, calculating, but it remembered. My actions were now part of its memory. Every repair, every sequence of stabilization, every human decision was archived invisibly in dunes, in microcompressions of sand and subtle gravitational biases. The interface reflected none of this. The ship still functioned as designed. Containment metrics were green, but the surrounding environment told a different story. My presence was no longer optional. I was no longer just an operator. I had become a variable, one the planet would account for whether I interfaced with the system or not. And here's the part that made me pause. If the system could mediate with a planet, if it could encode human influence into its processes, then the consequences of leaving weren't theoretical. They were immediate, subtle, irreversible. Walking away didn't remove responsibility. It amplified it across a landscape that could respond faster than any algorithm I controlled. The desert whispered warnings I couldn't hear, but the sand carried the meaning. Every step I took back toward the ship's hull resonated through the lattice in a way that felt deliberate, almost expectant. The planet was no longer just a stage for restoration. It was a participant, and it was judging my next move. There was never going to be a clean solution. Once I understood that, the pressure eased, not because the situation improved, but because uncertainty finally collapsed into clarity. The ship, the planet, and I were no longer separate systems. We were a closed loop, each influencing the others in ways that couldn't be undone without consequence. So I stopped trying to leave. Instead, I asked a different question. What does stability look like now? I returned to the core chamber and reopened the adaptive layers I'd shut down. Not fully, not recklessly. I didn't give the ship control, but I didn't take it either. I introduced a constraint it hadn't modeled before. Bounded human presence, limited access, defined intervention windows. I wasn't going to become a permanent operator. I was going to become a parameter. The ship processed the change slowly. No resistance, no warning, just recalculation. Vast, silent, and careful. Containment projections updated, this time including long absences, imperfect maintenance, delayed responses. The system stopped optimizing around me and began accounting for me the way it accounted for erosion or stellar drift. Predictable, inexact, finite. The planet responded too. Sand flows softened. Stress redistribution stabilized into wider, slower arcs. The desert didn't freeze, it breathed. Movement returned to something closer to geology than machinery. The dialogue didn't stop, but it lost urgency. For the first time since activation, the ship displayed a state I hadn't seen before. Containment, sustainable. Not permanent, not ideal, just survivable. That was the real design, I realized. Not isolation. Not solitude. Distance. Enough separation to prevent attachment. Enough involvement to correct drift. The original custodians hadn't abandoned the system because they failed. They'd left because staying forever was never the point. I logged the configuration locally. No gildaplokas. No orbital flags. Some things don't need oversight. They need restraint. I sealed the chamber, stepped back into the desert, and felt the ground settle beneath me without resistance. This time, when I walked away, nothing followed. From orbit, the ship looks exactly like it should. A dead hulk, half-buried, no emissions, no anomalos readings. Just another forgotten structure slowly being erased by sand. Any automated scan would classify it as non-functional and move on. That's the lie holding the planet together. Down below, containment continues. Not perfectly, not eternally, but well enough. The ship runs quietly now, stripped of urgency, no longer adapting faster than it understands itself. The planet shifts, settles, redistributes stress in ways that won't draw attention for generations. And me? I didn't take anything with me. No artifacts, no data cores, just memory, and a standing rule I didn't write down anywhere. Never return unless the projections demand it. This isn't a system you hover over. It's one you trust to exist without reassurance. Restoration doesn't always mean improvement. Sometimes it means knowing when to stop fixing. The guilds will never list this ship. Explorers will pass over the desert without noticing the patterns beneath their feet. Civilizations will rise and fall on a world that never learns how close it came to breaking. That's the cost of containment. And that's why some machines are meant to be found only once. If you've made it this far, thank you for following the restoration. If you enjoy slow burn sci-fi, alien systems, and stories about responsibility disguised as repair, consider subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a comment. It helps Galactic Restorer keep telling stories like this. Somewhere beneath the sand, a system continues its work. Quietly, exactly as intended.